Taking advantage of the return of good weather, he decided to resume or initiate several construction projects. Leaving his worrisome thoughts behind in his study, outside he put on a show of much mirth. He laughed with the princess, visited Madame, had dinner with her, went to inspect his guard, instructing it to put in a garden around the barracks, decided with the engineers on new improvement projects around town. In other words, he did everything to throw people off the track regarding the plan he was contemplating. A few days later, Monsieur Colonel d'Istria, Madame Mare's chamberlain, was sent to Naples to warn King Murat of the emperor's resolve to return to France, where the Bourbons were governing contrary to the nation's interests. He told him that the motherland was calling him, and he owed it to his love for her to respond to her call. He urged him to remain quietly in his kingdom, have his army take up good positions, and await developments. He told him he was assured that the Austrians would not make a move. Italy must remain neutral, and he would be leaving within a few days. Unfortunately, this prince did not heed the sage advice he was being given. He knew that he had wronged the emperor by his conduct in 1814. He did not hide from Monsieur Colonna his idea of assisting the emperor's return through a strong diversionary action in Italy. Monsieur Colonna begged him not to do it, saying it was the emperor's wish. He promised, but not strongly enough to prevent Monsieur Colonna from revealing his fears on the return to Portofrejo. He brought with him a letter from the King of Naples, filled with devotion, giving the news he had just received from his minister in Vienna of the closing of the Congress and the departure of the Russian emperor for his territories. This news, impatiently awaited by the emperor, made his departure almost immediate. He was, however, worried about the King of Naples' idea of entering Italy. He saw in this action, if it were to take place, how his affairs could be ruined by him. In 1815, just as he had ruined them in 1814. Before leaving the island, he therefore reiterated his wish that no action be undertaken without his order. King Murat, after having participated in the Russian campaign with that quality of chivalry that made him shine so on a battlefield, had left the army in Vilna, unhappy over a bulletin that left to the Viceroy of Italy the reorganization of the army. Taking advantage of his discontent, the Allies made overtures to him. He listened to them, but nevertheless served in the 1813 campaign and only returned to his kingdom after the Battle of Leipzig. England renewed its pressure on him and the Queen, stressing to both their own interest and that of their people if they did not want to be dragged down by the emperor's fall. Their hearts had been cruelly torn apart before abandoning the cause of France and the emperor, but they finally did so on January 11th, 1814. The prince joined the coalition and numbered among our enemies. A sad page we would like to tear from this fine story of life on the battlefield. The emperor did not feel he had to wait for confirmation from Vienna itself of the news conveyed by King Murat. He decided on his departure and prepared for it. During one of the evenings preceding his departure, he summoned Monsieur Poggi de Talavo, whose character he admired, brought him into his study, and told him about his plan to return to France and his wish that he come with him. He urged secrecy about what he was confiding to him, especially toward Madame and Princess Pauline, saying, "If Galeazzini is here, engage him under any pretext. I will give him a prefecture. Pons has been notified. He is a man as energetic as he is devoted, and he's coming with me." When Monsieur Poggi returned to the drawing room, Madame and the princess tried to find out from him what the emperor could have said, but he eluded their questions and remained impenetrable. The brig, which had been repaired, was painted a different color and loaded with supplies for a voyage of several months. 2 nights before, the emperor had dined in his room with General Drouot, talking to him about the war ammunition to be loaded on board the brig, the personnel that could be embarked on it, and those to be placed on other vessels, and Madame Mare's carriage to be loaded on board one of the expects to fool people into thinking that princess was going to Naples. Ending the conversation on that subject, he then talked about the Egyptian campaign. country of memories where we traveled Bible in hand. He analyzed the Muslim religion and our own. The first is all sensual, promising blue-eyed houris, verdant copses, streams full of milk. It's nothing but sensuality. Ours, on the other contrary, is all spiritual, the mind and charity rule. One is a religion of love, the other is all earthly and sensual. I was perfectly suited to settle in that country, given the little religion of my army. He said that in Italy, monks had shown him a manuscript by the historian Joseph, where the entire life of Jesus Christ had been inserted on a page with 2 or 3 lines, and said it had been a mistake for them not to delete that page. That evening, the emperor was very talkative. He told of several useful pranks, both at Brienne and at the military academy. He said, rarely was I caught in the traps that were set. Among us there were some sons of great families. Parents invariably urged their children to make friends with them in order to use their support later during their careers. We were merciless towards those that did, calling them all sorts of names, which led to fights where blows were given and received. He recalled his days as an artillery officer, expressing surprise at the quality of their mess and how little it cost them. He told of the care he had taken regarding his expenditures and the privations he forced on himself through careful economy in order to do what his richer friends did. He stated his success in Toulon did not surprise him. It was only during the first Italian campaign that he acquired great ambition. The recounting of all these details was of great interest to me and prompted my admiration for the man who, from a humble artillery officer, had through his genius made himself into the ranking man in the world. During these last days, the great map of France was spread out over the drawing-room rug, and the emperor on his knees would trace the route he proposed to follow. The Grand Marshal and General Drouot were the only ones allowed to know about it. Saint-Denis, Novaraz, and Santini had been sent to different points on the island to learn from the harbor captains the number of ships that were there. Several were chartered and were to proceed on a given day from the various points along the coast to the Portofrejo harbor. Monsieur Pont de Hero, director of the Rio mine, was specifically charged with his mission and with placing an embargo on all the island ports. As soon as the departure date was definitively set, thus the emperor had an inventory of all the ships in each port and what they could carry, so that he could pick the best ones, as there were more than he needed to transport the guard, the Corsican battalion, and the required equipment. During the night of the 25th and to the 26th, all the chartered ships proceeded to Portofrejo, and an embargo was placed on all others in the ports where they were located. It was a Sunday. Mass was celebrated as usual, with many people attending. According to his practice, after Mass, the emperor received people in the drawing room and told those who were there of the decision he had reached to return to France, where he was being called. Already, without any explanation, a great deal of activity was taking place in town. When at 1 p.m. the guard was ordered to go on board, there was a real explosion, and all were running to pick up their scattered gear. Although I suspected some great plan, the emperor only mentioned it the day before at bedtime, saying he was going to France and had to prepare everything for this trip while taking very little. He said to me, 1 chasseurs and 1 grenadier's officer, some shirts and nothing else. Without really complying with what he told me, I spent part of the night preparing things, taking an inventory of what remained to give to Madame, and I was careful to keep with me, as he had directed, a tricolor cockade to hand him when he requested it. Since the emperor had urged me not to mention anything until noon, and since all these arrangements could not be made in his quarters without being noticed by the staff, I answered all inquiries by saying the emperor was going to spend a few days in San Martino. Even the members of his household were so far from believing in this expedition that no one doubted the reason I gave was the truth. Opening his bedroom door and coming into my room, the emperor saw me busy at my inventory. Finding at hand a Lepine watch similar to the one he carried, he said to me, "Take this watch with you. It is a present for me. It dates back to my consulate." Attached to the watch was a gold chain and a key. I thanked the emperor for this present and for connecting it with such a brilliant period in his life. It is today among the relics I kept of this great man, and which I gave to the Museum of Sovereigns. On the day of departure, the emperor arose like any other day. Dr. Furreau came in as usual, as His Majesty was about to leave. "Well, Furreau, is your bag packed? We're going to France." The doctor smiled and replied, "I would like nothing better, but I see nothing that would lead me to believe it." "What? Since I am telling you it is so, be ready by the evening." Saint-Denis, who was holding the mirror the emperor was using to shave, smiled at me, thinking it was some form of joke the emperor was playing on his doctor. When the emperor had dressed and gone into the garden, they were much surprised when I told them nothing could be more true, and that they should make arrangements so as not to be taken unaware. I assured them of this departure only because the emperor had spoken of it, but not until noon would it be known throughout town. Until then, the secret of the expedition was known to only a few. After Mass, the emperor told those people who had attended, and the guard received the order to depart. All preparations were finished when suddenly the British corvette was spotted. First, it was feared it might have some knowledge of the plan. The Grand Marshal, who was with His Majesty, went down to his quarters. A large number of grenadiers were ordered to continue working. As the emperor had just dictated to his secretary, who was absent for a moment, the door to his study was open. He called me and told me to sit down, pointing to a small table in a corner of the study near the window. It was that used by Monsieur Rattray. This was the first time I wrote under the emperor's dictation, which he gave with such volubility that I couldn't keep pace with him. Then he went into the drawing room, where he had just been informed that General Drouot was waiting for him. I had barely written down the first few words when he disappeared, telling me to send that off immediately to the Grand Marshal. It was an order for him. I had retained its meaning in spite of the disarray of my mind. I went to tell Count Bertrand what had happened to me, and informed him verbally of what I had been unable to write. It directed him to order the brig's captain to set sail and leave the harbor, and if the British captain should ask him where he was going, to answer that he had just caulked the brig's hull and wanted to know if it was leaking. The idea of capturing the corvette in the event it was aware of the plan had also been expressed. The British captain, while passing the brig, did ask where it was going and was given that reply. The captain went to see Count Bertrand, who pretended to be in a great hurry to go up and see the emperor who was calling him. The Grand Marshal, as usual, invited the captain to dinner. He refused, stating he had to be in Livorno that same evening. Half an hour later, he was at sea, having crossed the harbor without anything striking him as odd. All was just as usual. Madame, Princess Pauline, Countess Bertrand, and a few wives of employees were to stay on the island and await developments. The princesses dined with the emperor, who was perfectly calm, nothing in his face revealing he was about to embark on such a perilous venture. After dinner, he went into the drawing room and told his butler, who was pouring his coffee, that he was to be on board without too much fuss in 1 hour. The people who were to accompany him were gathered there. A town delegation came to see him. One of them, the Chamberlain, Monsieur Ventini, spoke and expressed the pleasure and sorrow the Elbins felt on seeing His Majesty depart. The sorrow of having him no longer among them, and the pleasure of knowing that greater destinies were calling him to the continent. They wished for the success of his endeavors, and hoped that His Majesty would not forget the good people of Elba. The emperor told them that Elbins could count on his gratitude, and that their memory would always be dear to him. Grand Vicar Arrighi, along with his clergy, told him on leaving that he would pray to heaven for the success of such a vast undertaking. The emperor remained alone with Madame and the princess. That day, all papers had been burned, even those detailing with his memoirs, which he was already dictating. On the previous day, the emperor had worked on providing for the defense and safety of the island. He had named Monsieur Lapie, a colonel in the National Guard, its governor, with the title of brigadier general. He organized, with Monsieur Bogie, a junta for Corsica, and designated 8 people on the executive committee. He handed these gentlemen the decree naming the 12 members of this junta. The former were in charge of announcing the emperor's departure from Elba and having the tricolor raised over Corsica, with the recommendation they avoid any disorder and accomplish this quietly. They were not to leave until 3 days after His Majesty. Having settled all this, the emperor had to part with his family. The princess and Madame were in the throes of pain, full of fear and hope. They couldn't let the emperor out of their arms. All those who were going with His Majesty were allowed to kiss these ladies' hands. I was in the emperor's room, awaiting his final orders, when Princess Pauline entered, her beautiful face covered with tears. She came up to me, holding a diamond necklace worth 500,000 francs. She wanted to speak, but sobs choked her voice. I myself was moved by the state she was in. She said, "Here, the emperor sent me to hand you this necklace, as the emperor may need it if he's in trouble." Oh, were this to happen, Marshal, never abandon him. Take good care of him. Adieu, she said, offering her hand for me to kiss. Your Highness, I am hopeful. This is but an au revoir. This is not what I think. Some secret premonition seemed to tell her she would never see the emperor again. His Majesty walked in at this point, speaking words of consolation, and took her out into the garden. In the drawing room, I found Madame alone and in tears. Marchand, I am putting my son in your hands. Here, she said, handing me a candy box bearing a very good likeness of her. May this replace the one he now uses, should fate turn against him. Do not abandon him. She raised both hands to her eyes, and I heard nothing more but sobs. From the palace to the harbor, the street was full of people wishing to say a last goodbye to the emperor. The Italian imaginations were excited. The emperor's glory appeared to them in new forms and with richer and brighter colors. The entire guard was on board. A few Poles who were late remained on the island. One Mameluke had been confined to Pianosa, having fought a duel with a gunner whose hand he had cut off. He was forgotten there. I arrived on the brig. It was crowded. One could barely move around. The guard was divided between the brig, the sloops Etoile, and Caroline, and 4 transport ships, about 1,000 men, 600 of the guard, 300 from the Corsican battalion, 60 or 80 passengers, and a few Poles. The flotilla was commanded by Commander Chautard, with Lieutenant Jarry under him. Cries of "Vive l'Empereur!" first from a distance in the upper part of town announced that the emperor was leaving the palace. At 7:30, they accompanied him down to the harbor, swelling with the whole population, and stopped only when the brig was reached. Those on the brig saluted the island one last time while leaving it. The moon was full, its bright face lighting up the scene, lending majesty to the progress of our little fleet. The sea was calm, and an offshore breeze pushed us rapidly toward the coast of France. Madame Mère, Princess Pauline, and Countess Bertrand were to proceed to Rome, and from that capital come to Paris if the enterprise succeeded. Countess Bertrand, impatient to get back to France and not doubting the expedition's success for a moment, sailed a few days after our departure in spite of Madame's advice and landed on the coast of Antibes. There she was arrested with her children, her servants, and a few wives of the household personnel, taken to Marseille under guard and kept under arrest, with the consideration due her rank. She only recovered her freedom when the emperor had reached Paris, and orders to that effect were sent to Marshal Massena. Madame, more cautious, went to Rome with the princess and arrived at the same time the Countess Bertrand was landing at Antibes. Princess Pauline, too ill to undertake such a long voyage, returned to Italy.